Inside Cook County Jail, world's deadliest inmates and gang secrets exposed. Blood on the tier. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe, like, and comment, because the story you're about to hear is one that Chicago doesn't want the world to know. The scream echoed down Division 9 like a blade slicing through concrete silence. It wasn't the first scream guards had heard that night, but this one was different. It carried terror, finality, and the metallic clang of a body collapsing against steel bars. By the time officers rushed toward the tier, the fluorescent lights flickered, casting long shadows across a scene soaked in chaos. Blood smeared the floor in streaks that told their own story. A fight had erupted, and it was no ordinary brawl. Cook County Jail, the largest single-site jail in America, was no stranger to violence. But even here, in a place that held thousands of men tied to the most dangerous gangs in Chicago, this night would stand out. Inside one overcrowded cell block, a young man known only by his street name, Lil Smoke, lay motionless, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling. His throat was cut clean, too precise for a random shank fight, too brutal for a message to be ignored. The guards pulled back the remaining inmates, cuffing and dragging them away, but every man wore the same expression, a look of cold silence, lips sealed shut by the unspoken rules of gangland survival. Nobody saw anything. Nobody knew anything. And yet, everybody understood what had just happened. Cook County Jail was a world within a world. On the streets of Chicago, the Gangster Disciples, Vice Lords, and Latin Kings battled for corners, for drug routes, for reputation. Inside Cook County, those wars didn't stop, they intensified. Housing units became territories. Cells became command centers. Orders traveled on scraps of paper passed hand to hand, or in coded conversations during rec time. What happened to Lil Smoke wasn't random. It was calculated. And it was just the beginning. Detectives from the Cook County Sheriff's Intelligence Unit arrived hours later, slipping past flashing camera lights and the restless crowd of families outside the jail. They'd seen killings before, but even hardened investigators knew something about this case didn't fit the usual jailhouse stabbing. The blade was too sharp. The wound too exact. Someone inside had smuggled in a weapon far more sophisticated than the crude razors taped to toothbrush handles they usually confiscated. This killing was planned with surgical precision. The lead detective, Sergeant Marcus Darden, had worked gang intelligence for 2 decades. He knew the signs. This wasn't a beef, he muttered, scanning the crime scene. This was an execution. As dawn broke over Chicago, word of the killing spread beyond the walls of Cook County. Inside gang hierarchies, a ripple effect began. To some, Lil Smoke was just another name, another inmate caught in the endless cycle of violence. But to others, he was a messenger, a kid who carried secrets too dangerous for anyone on the outside to hear. His silence had been guaranteed the only way gangs knew how. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger the case became. Jail logs showed that Lil Smoke had been visited just days earlier by an attorney with suspected ties to gang leadership. Confidential sources whispered that he'd been planning to flip, to testify in exchange for protection. But no papers were filed, no official deals confirmed. Everything was speculation, a web of rumors that could just as easily be misinformation planted by inmates themselves. Still, something was clear. Someone powerful inside the jail wanted him gone. That night, while detectives sifted through surveillance footage of flickering hallways and muffled shouts, an anonymous call came through. A guard's voice, distorted by panic, whispered just 2 words before the line went dead. Check 3B. When officers stormed Section 3B, they discovered something that froze the entire command staff. Hidden beneath a bunk, wrapped in a sweatshirt and coated with grease to mask metal detectors, was not just a homemade shank, but a military-grade blade. Real steel. Not prison-forged, not improvised. Someone had brought it in. And in a jail as heavily monitored as Cook County, that should have been impossible. The questions multiplied. Who smuggled in the weapon? How had it passed through checkpoints? And why target Lil Smoke? Theories swirled. Maybe he disrespected the wrong person, maybe it was a warning to would-be informants, maybe he'd stumbled into secrets that connected gang rivalries inside the jail to Chicago's bloody streets outside. Detectives interviewed dozens of inmates, but no one cracked. The gangs had their own justice system, their own rules of silence. Talking meant death. And as one Latin King lieutenant whispered with a chilling smile during interrogation, "Ain't no secrets in Cook County, only bodies to keep 'em buried." By week's end, a bigger revelation dropped. Investigators uncovered a smuggling pipeline, not from visitors, not from corrupt inmates, but allegedly involving jail staff. Cigarettes, drugs, and weapons moved in exchange for cash. And if a blade of that caliber had slipped through, it meant someone on the inside wasn't just turning a blind eye, they were working for the gangs. The discovery shook the jail to its core. Guards were suddenly suspects, officers questioned their own partners, and inmates laughed from behind the bars. The balance of power wasn't on the state's side, it was still in the hands of the gangs. And then came the twist that pushed the case into darker waters. The weapon found under the bunk wasn't just any knife. Forensic analysis revealed faint etchings on the handle, initials tied to a Vice Lord's enforcer known as King Dre. Problem was, King Dre wasn't in Cook County Jail. He was locked up in Stateville, 40 miles away. Somehow, his reach had extended across prisons, across razor wire, and into the cell block where Lil Smoke met his end. The investigators thought they were dealing with one murder. But as the evidence mounted, they realized they were looking at something far bigger, a conspiracy that tied Cook County's overcrowded tiers to the very heart of Chicago's bloodiest street wars. The killing of Lil Smoke wasn't just a crime. It was a message. And the people behind it were just getting started. The silence of the tiers. The wail of the siren cut through the morning fog over South California Avenue. To the public outside, Cook County Jail was a fortress, 96 acres of concrete, steel, and razor wire stretching across Chicago's west side. But inside, it felt more like a powder keg, each tier a fuse waiting to be lit. The murder of Lil Smoke had turned the place into a pressure cooker, and everyone, inmates, guards, even the sheriff's detectives, knew it was only a matter of time before it exploded again. Detective Marcus Darden walked the narrow corridor of Division 9, his eyes scanning the rows of cells. He had been inside countless jails and prisons, but Cook County always struck him differently. It wasn't just the overcrowding, men sleeping on mats in day rooms, bodies crammed into cells designed for half their number, it was the atmosphere. The gangs didn't just live here. They ruled here. And that was the problem. Lil Smoke's killing was too precise to be inmate improvisation. The military-grade blade, the execution-style cut, the silence that followed, it screamed orchestration. Darden knew the hit came from higher up, but proving it inside a place where loyalty was life and betrayal meant death would be almost impossible. As he and his partner, Detective Carla Ruiz, made their way toward 3B, the section where the knife had been found, inmates pressed against the bars, shouting insults, threats, and sometimes cryptic warnings. One voice called out over the din, "You diggin' in graves you don't wanna open, cop." Darden paused. The voice belonged to a young Latin king, his face marked with teardrop tattoos. He smiled, flashing gold teeth, before disappearing back into the shadows of his cell. It wasn't bravado. It was a promise. The investigation widens. Back in the sheriff's office, the investigation team spread out the evidence. They had the knife. They had the initials linking it to King Dre, a vice lord's shot caller housed in Stateville. They had rumors of a smuggling ring involving jail staff. But rumors weren't evidence, and without evidence, the case was just another body in Cook County's long, bloody history. Ruiz pulled up visitor logs. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the screen. Just days before the murder, an attorney named William Carson had signed in to see Lil Smoke. Carson had a reputation for being more than just a lawyer. Whispers tied him to laundering money for the vice lords. Officially, nothing was proven. Unofficially, every detective in Chicago knew his name. What if Smoke was talking? Ruiz asked. Darden leaned back, rubbing his temples. Then this wasn't just a jailhouse beef. This was damage control. If Lil Smoke had been preparing to testify, he might have carried information that reached beyond the jail. Details about gang-controlled drug pipelines, corrupt officials, maybe even murders on the street. And if he had, someone inside had made sure he would never speak again. But here was the catch. No paperwork existed. No protective custody request. No filed agreement with prosecutors. Just whispers. Which meant either Smoke's intentions had been kept secret, or someone on the inside had buried the evidence before it ever reached daylight. Shadows in the ranks. Later that week, Darden sat across from a corrections officer named Brian Mitchell in an interrogation room. Mitchell had been on duty the night of the killing. On paper, he was clean, a 10-year veteran with no disciplinary history. But whispers from inmates placed him near the cell block when the weapon was planted. "Brian," Darden started, his tone calm, almost friendly, "you've worked this jail a long time. You've seen what happens when things get out of hand. You know what this place can do to a man." Mitchell stared at the table. His hands shook. "Nobody's accusing you of killing that kid," Darden continued. "But something got in here that shouldn't have. And the only way it gets in here is through staff." Mitchell's jaw tightened. He whispered, barely audible, "You don't know what it's like. You don't know the pressure." Darden leaned in. "Then tell me." Mitchell's eyes flicked toward the camera in the corner of the room, then back to Darden. He swallowed hard, then shook his head. "You can't protect me," he muttered. "Nobody can." And just like that, he shut down. It was the first crack in the silence, proof that corruption wasn't just a rumor. But it wasn't enough. Without hard evidence, Mitchell's words meant nothing. Worse, his hesitation painted a target on his back. 3 days later, Mitchell called in sick. He never showed up again. His badge and uniform were found in a dumpster outside a bar on Pulaski Road. His car was parked 2 blocks away, door open, keys still in the ignition. Mitchell himself was gone. A message in blood. The disappearance sent shockwaves through the investigation. Guards whispered about betrayal. Inmates celebrated, laughing that the cop got checked. To Darden, it was confirmation. The gangs weren't just killing inmates. They were silencing staff too. Then came the second body. An inmate named Jerome J-Rock Turner, a known gangster disciple with connections to Lil Smoke, was found hanging in his cell. Officially, it was logged as suicide. But Darden had seen enough crime scenes to know better. The knots were too tight. The positioning was wrong. And scrawled on the wall in blood-red marker were 3 chilling words: "Stop digging now." The handwriting matched no known sample in the tier. The marker had been smuggled in, just like the knife. Someone was playing a dangerous game. Pressure from above. The sheriff's office was divided. Some higher-ups pushed to close the investigation quickly. Another inmate murder, nothing new. But others, including the state's attorney's office, wanted answers. If gangs had infiltrated jail staff, it was a scandal that could rock Chicago politics. Ruiz slammed a folder shut during a late-night meeting. "They're killing our witnesses, Marcus. They killed Smoke, now J-Rock, and Mitchell's vanished. How many more before someone pulls the plug?" Darden stared out the window at the flashing city lights. "They want us scared. They want us blind. But if they're tying up loose ends this fast, it means there's something here worth hiding." The ticking clock. As winter storms rolled over Chicago, the jail's tension boiled over. Rival gangs clashed in day rooms, leaving pools of blood on cracked linoleum floors. Guards broke up fights daily, but it felt more like they were managing a war zone than a correctional facility. Then came a tip that changed everything. A confidential informant, hidden behind layers of anonymity, slipped word to investigators. Lil Smoke had been carrying a list. A handwritten ledger of names, dates, and transactions linking gang leaders inside Cook County to violent crimes on the outside. Drive-bys, drug shipments, payoff. The kind of evidence that could lock men away for life. But the ledger wasn't found on him when he died. Someone had taken it. Closing in. Darden and Ruiz pushed harder, tracing every visitor, every guard rotation, every camera glitch. One pattern stood out. On the night of Smoke's murder, 3 cameras in Division 9 went dark for exactly 17 minutes. Not before, not after. 17 minutes. Just enough time for the hit to go down and the weapon to be planted. The shutdown wasn't random. It was intentional. Someone with clearance had flipped the switch. Ruiz whispered the words they both feared. "We've got a mole." The realization was chilling. The gangs didn't just have influence. They had eyes inside law enforcement. The investigation wasn't just dangerous for inmates, it was a death sentence for anyone who got too close. One night, after a grueling day of interviews and paperwork, Darden returned home to his South Side apartment. The street was quiet, the air heavy with snow. As he unlocked his door, he noticed an envelope taped to the frame. No return address. Just his name, written in jagged letters. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed his partner, Detective Ruiz, leaving her house that morning. On the back, scrawled in the same red marker found in J-Rock's cell, were the words, "You're next." Darden froze, the photo trembling in his hand. The gangs weren't just watching the jail. They were watching him. The line between the inside and the outside had blurred. And in Chicago, once that line disappeared, survival became a coin toss. Walls that talk. The city of Chicago was wrapped in a thick curtain of snow, its streets muffled and silent under the weight of winter. But inside Cook County Jail, silence was a myth. The place breathed violence, whispered threats, and simmered secrets. Division 9's concrete corridors didn't just hold inmates, they held power, shifting loyalties, and invisible lines of control that outsiders rarely understood. Detective Marcus Darden sat at his desk, the Polaroid of Ruiz still burning in his mind. He had tucked it into an evidence folder, but the image haunted him, her stepping out of her front door, unaware that someone had been close enough to capture her in that single frame. Close enough to kill her, if they wanted to. For the first time in his career, Darden felt the invisible hand of the gangs reaching past the razor wire and into his own life. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was survival. The warning. When Ruiz entered the office the next morning, Darden slid the photo across the table. She froze, her face tightening as she studied it. "They're watching me," she whispered. "They're watching both of us," Darden replied. "And they're getting bolder." She set the photo down carefully, but her hands trembled. "Marcus, this isn't just a gang hit anymore. This is organized. They've got resources, logistics. They've got people feeding them information. And now they've got us in their sights." The weight of it hung in the room like smoke. Ruiz had known the risks when she joined gang intelligence, but this was different. This wasn't just chasing shadows on the streets of Chicago, this was a war being fought in plain sight, with rules no law could contain. A whisper in the dark. 2 nights later, a jailhouse informant known only as Ghost requested an emergency meet. Ghost had been an on-again, off-again source for years, feeding scraps of intel from inside the Latin Kings in exchange for small favors: cigarettes, extra phone time, protection. He wasn't trustworthy, but sometimes even liars told the truth when their lives were on the line. Darden and Ruiz met him in a secured interview room, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. Ghost leaned forward, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. "You think you're investigating one murder," he said. "You're not. You're investigating a system." "What system?" Ruiz pressed. "The whole damn jail," Ghost hissed. "You think gangs just control tiers? Nah. They got their hooks in COs, nurses, even kitchen staff. Money flows both ways. You ever wonder why contraband never stops? Why the cameras blink at just the right time? Why some inmates walk around like they're untouchable? It's 'cause they're not inmates. They're assets. The jail works for them as much as they work for the jail." Darden frowned. "And Smoke?" Ghost's voice dropped to a whisper. Smoke was about to drop names. Big names. Names that would tear this whole thing wide open. That list he had? They're looking for it too. Whoever finds it first controls everything. Ruiz leaned closer. "Where's the list now?" Ghost's eyes flicked to the door, fear etched into his face. "Word is, it's hidden. Not outside, not with family, here. Somewhere in the jail." He tucked it away before they got to him. "That's why they're scrambling. That's why people are dying." Then Ghost leaned back, his tone final. "You didn't hear this from me. If you tell anyone I talked, I'm gone. And not just gone from here, gone." Moments later, guards escorted him out, leaving Darden and Ruiz staring at each other. If Ghost was right, the key to unraveling the conspiracy wasn't outside in Chicago Street. It was buried somewhere inside Cook County Jail. The betrayal. The next morning, Ruiz's phone buzzed with an unlisted number. She hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, calm and measured, spoke on the other end. "Detective Ruiz. You've been asking questions that don't need answers." Her chest tightened. "Who is this?" "You think you're safe because you wear a badge," the voice continued. "But in here? Badges mean nothing. You keep pushing and you'll end up like Smoke. Or like Mitchell." Then the line went dead. Ruiz slammed the phone down, her heart pounding. But something in the call struck her. The mention of Mitchell. His disappearance had been kept quiet, off the record. Almost nobody outside the investigation knew the details. Which meant the leak wasn't just in the jail. It was in law enforcement. Someone in their own circle was feeding information to the gangs. She told Darden, and for the first time in years, she saw him pale. The hidden ledger. Days later, a fight erupted between rival gangs in Division 6. Guards rushed to contain it, but in the chaos, an inmate slipped Ruiz a folded piece of paper during her walkthrough. She didn't open it until she was back in her car, doors locked, windows fogging in the cold. Scrawled inside, in shaky handwriting, were 6 words: "Ledger in laundry." Smoke hit it. Her pulse quickened. The laundry unit was one of the few places in Cook County where inmates from different divisions crossed paths. It was also one of the least monitored. Piles of uniforms, sheets, and towels moved in and out daily, providing endless places to stash contraband. That night, Ruiz and Darden pulled strings, arranging a covert search of the laundry. Under a mountain of damp linens, stitched into the lining of a pillowcase, they found it. A notebook. Torn, stained, but intact. They flipped it open, eyes widening. Names. Date. Code. Cash amounts. Even street corners mapped to initials. The ledger wasn't just incriminating, it was explosive. It tied gang leaders in Cook County to murders, drug shipments, and payoffs stretching across Chicago. Worse, it named individuals in law enforcement who were allegedly on the payroll. And one of those names was a deputy in the sheriff's intelligence unit. Their unit. The walls close in. Darden and Ruiz knew what the ledger meant. It was proof. It was motive. It was a death warrant. If the gangs found out they had it, they were as good as dead. If the wrong people in law enforcement found out, it might end the same way. They kept it hidden, making copies in secret. But paranoia grew. Every time Ruiz drove home, she checked her mirrors. Every time Darden walked into the office, he scanned faces for betrayal. They were fighting a war on two fronts, inside the jail and inside their own rank. Then the retaliation came. A week after finding the ledger, a drive-by shooting rattled Ruiz's neighborhood. Bullets ripped through parked cars, shattering windows and echoing down the block. Nobody was killed, but the message was clear. You're not untouchable. Not out here, not in there. At the same time, rumors spread through the jail like wildfire. Inmates whispered that the cops had Smoke's ledger. Some laughed, saying whoever held it wouldn't live long enough to use it. Others speculated that the gangs were already planning a hit, even on the outside. And then Ghost, the informant, disappeared. One day he was in his cell, the next he was gone. Records claimed he had been transferred, but no paper trail existed. No facility logs. Nothing. He had been erased. The descent. By late January, Darden hadn't slept properly in weeks. He stared at the ledger night after night, memorizing every name, every code, knowing any of it could be the key to cracking Chicago's bloodiest secret. But the deeper he studied, the darker it became. There were names he recognized, mid-level enforcers, street bosses. But there were also initials tied to judges, prosecutors, even politicians. If true, the corruption reached far beyond Cook County Jail. It reached into the veins of the city itself. Ruiz pressed him one night as they sat in the squad car outside the jail. "Marcus, what if this goes higher than we can touch? What if we bring this forward and it gets buried, and us along with it?" He didn't answer. Because she was right. In Chicago, truth was dangerous. And sometimes survival meant silence. But Darden had never been good at staying silent. The next morning, Ruiz didn't show up for briefing. Her phone went straight to voicemail. No one at her apartment answered the door. Darden drove across town, his stomach knotted with dread. When he finally forced his way into her home, the place was eerily still. Coffee sat cold on the counter. A chair was knocked over in the living room. And on the kitchen table was a single Polaroid. It showed Ruiz, blindfolded, hands bound. On the back, written in red marker, were 3 words: "The ledger now." The last name in the ledger. The snow had turned to ice overnight, hardening Chicago's streets into glass. Detective Marcus Darden gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened, Ruiz's Polaroid sitting on the passenger seat. Her blindfolded face stared back at him with lifeless eyes that weren't lifeless, not yet. The red marker on the back screamed louder than any siren, "The ledger now." Darden had spent his career tracing the outlines of Chicago's gangs, following trails of blood across alleys, housing projects, and prison tiers. But this was different. This wasn't just a war between gangs. This was a war between the truth and the silence that protected it. And now, Ruiz's life hung in the balance. The setup. The ledger was hidden in a safe deposit box across town, far from Cook County Jail. Darden had made copies, but those wouldn't matter if Ruiz didn't survive the next 24 hours. Whoever had her, gang soldiers, corrupt staff, maybe both, wanted the original. But handing it over wasn't an option. Not with the names inside. Judges, deputies, politicians. If the gangs got the book back, everything Smoke had died for, everything Mitchell had disappeared over, would vanish into the shadows forever. Darden's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered. A calm voice spoke. "You've got 6 hours. Bring the ledger to the old meatpacking warehouse on 43rd. Come alone. If we see a badge, she dies. If we see a tail, she dies. You understand?" Darden's throat tightened. "I want proof she's alive." The line went silent. Then, faintly, he heard Ruiz's voice. Strained. Shaking. "Marcus, don't." The call cut. Into the lion's den. The warehouse on 43rd had been abandoned for years, its rusting skeleton looming over cracked pavement and broken glass. Darden parked 2 blocks away, the ledger tucked inside his coat. The wind howled through the streets, carrying the smell of rot and steel. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with mildew. A single light bulb swayed from a chain, casting shadows that stretched and twisted along the walls. And there she was, Ruiz, tied to a chair, blindfold gone but face bruised, blood dried at the corner of her mouth. 3 men stood behind her. 2 he didn't recognize, muscle, tattoos marking allegiance to the Latin kings. The 3rd made his stomach drop. It was Officer Brian Mitchell. Alive. The betrayal. Mitchell smiled, but it wasn't the nervous, broken man Darden had interrogated weeks earlier. This was different. His eyes were calm, his stance confident. "You really thought I disappeared, huh?" Mitchell said, his voice low and even. "That I was running scared? No, Marcus. I've been running this from the start." Darden's pulse thundered. "You're working for them?" Mitchell stepped forward. "Not working for them. Working with them. You think this city runs on justice? No. It runs on deals. On money. On survival. These gangs? They don't just fight each other. They feed the system. Cops, judges, politicians. They all get their cut. I just stopped pretending otherwise." Ruiz spat blood onto the floor. "You sold us out, Brian. You sold Smoke out. You sold everyone out." Mitchell crouched beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face with chilling casualness. Smoke didn't understand his place. He thought he could talk. He thought he mattered. He didn't. Just like you don't. The standoff. Darden pulled the ledger from his coat, holding it up. "This is what you want? Fine. Let her go first." Mitchell shook his head, smirking. "Marcus, you're smarter than that. You don't make demands here. You hand it over, or we cut her throat and take it off your body." The gang soldiers shifted, knives glinting in the dim light. Darden's mind raced. He had 1 gun, 3 enemies, and Ruiz tied up. The odds were hopeless. But hopeless was better than dead. He threw the ledger onto the floor. The book slid across the concrete, stopping at Mitchell's boot. Mitchell bent down, picking it up with almost reverent hands. He flipped through the pages, nodding. "It's all here. Every name. Every dollar. Every drop of blood. With this, we don't just own the jail. We own the city." Ruiz's eyes locked on Darden's. She mouthed one word, "Now." The fight. Darden moved fast. Too fast for Mitchell to react. He drew his gun and fired, the crack shattering the silence. 1 gang soldier dropped instantly. The second lunged, knife flashing, slicing across Darden's arm as he turned and fired again. The man collapsed, clutching his chest. Mitchell dove behind Ruiz, yanking her upright as a shield. He pressed a blade to her throat, eyes wild. "Put it down, Marcus," he roared. Darden aimed, sweat dripping into his eyes. His arm throbbed where the knife had cut him. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't!" Ruiz gasped, wincing under the blade. Mitchell sneered, holding the ledger in his other hand like a trophy. "You can't stop this. You kill me, this book disappears. You save her, the city still burns. Either way, we win." Darden's mind flashed through every name in that ledger. Every dead kid in Chicago's alleys. Every cover-up. Every silence. He couldn't let it vanish again. So he aimed not at Mitchell's head, not at his chest. He aimed at the ledger. The shot ripped through the book, pages exploding in a cloud of paper and blood. Mitchell screamed, dropping Ruiz as he staggered back, clutching his shredded hand. Ruiz fell to the ground, coughing, scrambling free of the ropes. Darden closed the distance in seconds, slamming Mitchell against the wall. "This ends now," he growled. But Mitchell laughed, blood streaming from his mouth. "You think this ends? You've just made enemies you can't even see. This city belongs to us, Marcus. It always has. It always will. And with that, he collapsed. Dead. The fallout. The warehouse echoed with silence, broken only by Ruiz's ragged breathing. Pages of the ledger fluttered across the floor, torn and blood-stained. Some names were legible. Others lost forever. Darden knelt, scooping up what he could. Enough to prove corruption. Enough to start something. But not enough to finish it. Police sirens wailed in the distance, backup finally arriving. As officers stormed the warehouse, Ruiz leaned against the wall, clutching her throat. Marcus will never stop them all. You know that, right? Darden stared at the ruined ledger in his hands. Maybe not. But we can make them bleed. The haunting ending. Weeks later, headlines filled the Chicago Tribune and national outlets. Cook County corruption exposed, gang ties alleged in Sheriff's Department. The ledger had sparked an internal investigation, several arrests, and political fallout that rattled the city. But the story wasn't clean. Too many pages had been destroyed. Too many names remained in shadows. And then, one night, Darden returned home to find another envelope taped to his door. No address. No note. Just a single photograph. It showed a new victim. An inmate, face unrecognizable, lying in a pool of blood inside Cook County. On the back, written in the same red marker, "This isn't over." Darden stared at the message, the city's skyline glowing in the distance. He knew it was true. Cook County Jail wasn't just a jail. It was a kingdom. And kingdoms didn't fall in one battle. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the cold night air, and whispered to himself, "This war's just beginning."